everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reluctant Hero podcast. My name is Pauline Dugold. I am the peak performance coach, and I interview people in this podcast in order to bring inspirational stories to you, listener, and help you on your hero's path journey. We all have the hero within ourselves, and sometimes we find ourselves reluctant to go on, to continue, to deal with those challenges that we're constantly presented with on the road to our elevated version of ourselves. So, in these stories, in these conversations, I hope to bring some aspects that can inspire you to continue going. So, in this episode, we have Sabrina Shirley. I know her from my Elite Mentorship Forum organization. I am a trainer for Elite Mentorship Forum, and that is what unites us. We have been part of this organization for quite some time, and we have been also on the journey of transformation ourselves. So, Sabrina, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what your journey has been like.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me on your podcast. My journey has been this. I am a former corporate America leader. I worked in corporate America for nearly 4 decades, so a very long time. And I had a culmination of events that happened to me in 2022. They all centered around health, finances, and relationships. And they all happen in the span of about 6 weeks. So it started with notification that I was no longer going to have my role anymore in my job, meaning I was going to be laid off. And then that was followed by a couple of weeks later, taking a tumble down literally 3 steps onto carpet. But in that, I managed to break my kneecap, which is considered a very severe knee injury, required surgery and about 8 months of rehab. And then about a month after that, I had recently gotten engaged, maybe about 3 or 4 months prior, and broke the engagement. So I had all that happen all at once, which is a lot. And then was in a position that I needed to redefine myself and figure out what my next steps were going to be in corporate America. And then I came across this wonderful, wise gentleman named Peter Sage. And in listening to him, he made a statement that caught my attention. And his statement was, your outer world follows your inner world. And I was like, what are you talking about? My inner world is fine. There can't be anything wrong with my inner world. So, but it intrigued me enough because of the situation I was in to explore it further. And so as a result, I started into Elite Mentorship Forum, otherwise known as EMF, and took the journey and did the hard work and actually became very grateful for the experience of being laid off because now I didn't have the conflict of trying to work a job and trying to do EMF and dig deep. And it allowed me to be reflective and to view my career. I could see different things that happened in my career and why they happened, like the 4 levels of consciousness. I could see where I was in to me, where I was in by me, and where I was in through me. I wish the through me part was longer, but there was a time period where through me was there, about a quarter of my decade. And then I could also see that in that same quarter of my decade was the one time that I worked for really good bosses. And so I became inspired to become a trainer because I realized that there's so many individuals out there who are sleeping awake, looped into patterns, and aren't just aware of their thoughts, the things they say, because that was also something I became very aware of. And for leaders in the corporate space, I recognize that, wow, if this was a thing in corporate America, and leaders were developed with these tools, what a better workplace this would be. You would actually have leaders that people want to work for because they're not bringing their stuff to work and putting it on you because people have their lives and they have their struggles, but they would know emotionally how to handle it. They would, I think one of the greatest assets they would have is they would be great mentors. I feel like if I were back in that space where I never saw myself as a mentor, I would be a kick butt mentor because I now have tools to be able to do that. And then as a result, you're developing people, you're teaching people how to develop, you're giving them new ways to set goals. You're telling them or guiding them on how to focus. And so then you have a highly productive team. And then their leader likes them as a leader because of the results they're getting with their team. So that's the vision I see for this work for myself and what I want to accomplish. And I'm just trying to carve that path to get there.
That is amazing. I love that story, and especially with accumulation of all the things that you said happened to you in 2022. It's sometimes that's how it says either shift or be shifted. So sometimes universe sends us these kind of events that really forces us to slow down, forces us to change our perspective, and sometimes change everything in our outer environment. So it's funny how that one line, your outer world follows your inner world, can really bring into attention everything that is happening and start to make sense. I wouldn't say that it makes sense instantly of on all levels, but it begins this process of understanding.
Correct. I would totally agree with you on that because it takes a while to kind of understand what that truly means. And by the way, I didn't tell you, I like to call myself an inner world designer because of that. And I've learned that the best way to get people to understand that is it's about changing and redesigning your thoughts and your beliefs. That is your inner world, your feelings, your emotions. And once you can recognize the power of the mind and how your thoughts literally lead you versus most people react to life. Something bad happens to them, and I'll give you a couple of examples of things that have happened to me since my transformation. I'm not a super patient person. I'm into efficiency because I worked in corporate America, and so everything's got to be efficient, fast, got to get it done, right? So one of the things is if I want to order a takeout, I will order it ahead so that it's already ready and I pick it up and I can keep going. And heaven forbid, if I get there and it's not ready, that might be a problem. But recently, I had that happen. And I arrived. They told me that my order hadn't even been started. And they were like, is that going to be a problem? I said, you know what? No, it's not going to be a problem. I said, for two reasons. One, I needed some customization on my order, and your system only allowed for 18 characters. So I couldn't really fully describe what I wanted. So now we get to get it right. And I've got some homework I need to do. So I can just sit here while I'm waiting and be working on the homework. And the lady was just amazed at how calm I was, how I wasn't, screaming or upset. The old me would have for sure. And then another example was I literally almost got run off the road. I mean, I'm just driving, minding my business, and I look out of the corner of my eye and I see a car coming into my lane. Grateful there was a sidewalk and it was unencumbered. So there were no people, no fire hydrants, anything like that. And I was able to pull off to get out of the way of that car. And I just sat there for a few moments and took a few deep breaths, recomposed myself, and then got back and went on about where I was going. Now, the old me, I would have been upset. I would have ruminated over it. I would have talked about it for weeks. might have followed the car and took their tag and just really been worked up about it. But with this training, I was not fazed by it. I stayed in my center. So yeah.
Yes, I resonate with that completely because early on, when I discovered Peter and 4 years ago, and I started working with information he was providing, I also learned to go with the flow. Peter's really good about translating concepts into metaphors and allegories that allows you to understand and then apply to your own life. And for me, it helped me to really stop the same obsession about events that I couldn't control. So learning to go with the flow of things and just letting them go and letting them be without affecting me too much is also been something that I've experienced just like you described. And another thing that I resonate with is the designer of the inner world. My career actually started as an interior designer. I was set out to, I'm an artist, so I set out to be a designer, to design the physical reality for people to enhance their lives. And what I realized later is that I enjoy designing of the interior world so much better because the inner world creates our outer world. So trying to change the outer reality is working with a very heavy, dense energy that can only be shifted to some extent. And it takes a lot of energy to change anything in the physical environment. It's much easier to deal with internal world and design it there and then see what shows up as a result. So I hear you exactly in what you're saying there.
Yes, yes. Now, I want to go back for a moment to the leaders in the workplace because I have a special passion for women leaders. All leaders, but women leaders, because I feel like as women, one of the biggest things that happens is the stress. The stress of the pressures of the environment, you got to, it's particularly if you work for a public company, and you're constantly having to meet those goals in order to be relevant in the stock market to earn money for your investors. So you have those pressures. But then you also, I found, have another pressure of not being able to fully come to work and be vulnerable and authentic. That you feel like I can't be myself because if I'm myself, then they won't either take me serious or my voice won't be heard. And therefore, I've got to kind of put a mask on to fit in. And so I understand that. But then I also understand that there's balance. And again, using the reference of health, finances, and relationships, most women who are, or maybe many, maybe most isn't the right word, but many women that are in the corporate space struggle with that balance. And you either see it in that their weight, you see it in their weight. That was me. You see it maybe in their relationships. That was me. Because the focus was work and this was my priority and I paid a heavy toll for it both physically and in my relationships. The finance part of it was there, but the other two were not. So I recognize that there's an imbalance. And so this program will also help to restore that balance because through it, they'll learn what their values are and they'll be able to put rules around it and be able to make decisions out of who they truly are and be able to take those masks off and show up as an authentic leader, which, as Renee Brown talks about, is the only type of leader to be.
I love that aspect and what you're bringing into light because I have personally struggled with the contradiction of being in the corporate world for many years and hearing and reading about how, as a woman, I should not be that too much feminine. I should not be too nurturing or too attentive to other people in that environment because it is not welcomed in that hyper masculine world where I have been. And on the other hand, so that was my programming, that was my kind of learning experience in the early years of my career. And then I actually started on the journey of reconnecting with my own femininity, which I have discovered for myself was not doing that well at all. You can call it the wounded feminine aspect when we are trying so hard to control the physical reality and
Mhm,
shift into masculine aspect of being, which
mhm,
means not trusting masculine and trying to embody it. But as a woman, it becomes heavy and burdensome. And that's what is resulting in stress and all kinds of other effects. And in addition, what you're describing with the weight gain and the relationships breakdown, when woman is not really embodying herself in a feminine, she cannot connect with her partner on the deeper level. She becomes like a man, and the man does not want another body in the relationship. So that's why most of the relationships have difficulties in that regard, because when a woman is so focused on her career, she embodies the masculine, she starts becoming driven and competitive, controlling, and that affects the relationships on a greater scale. And she cannot then go into the feminine aspects, which are flexibility and nurturance and joy and fluidity and creativity, because she does not feel safe enough to do that. That's quite the big problem I see in the world right now.
Yes, I totally agree. You nailed that. In terms of my lived experience, let alone the lived experience of others. I will add, though, that aside from the weight gain from health, there it could show up as other health issues. And as we know, or maybe people don't know, but up to 90%, the range is about 75 to 90% of current today health issues are related to stress. There's, just high incidences of cancer. People are walking around with back pain and hip pain and all kinds of pains, headaches, and they don't recognize that it's being born out of stress. And then if you're living a life of stress and you're just sleeping awake and not, you're just going through the motions, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you just wake up one day and that's when you will get the message. Maybe it's falling down 3 stairs on carpet and breaking your kneecap to suddenly sit you down, quiet you, center you so that you can recognize that maybe there's a different path to achieve what you're seeking. Or maybe you're really seeking something else and just haven't had the time to focus on it.
Absolutely. And actually, it's been found that a lot of health issues stem from inflammation in the body.
Mhm.
Inflammation can be a result of stress. If there is too much stress, our brains actually crave sweet foods and carbohydrates and sugars. When we eat the
Mhm.
sugars, it increases inflammation. When it increases inflammation, it results in weight gain, it results in heart issues, it results in joint issues. There's so many reasons. But the beginning of it, the really fundamentally what is at the bottom of it is the stress of misalignment, stress of
Mhm.
lack of trust. And one of the things in the organization that is everybody's talking about inclusivity right now, but you can't force people into including everybody. That is the psychological safety and inclusion that is built on trust. So, how can you have trust if people are not feeling truly themselves, if they can't be authentic, if they're trying to bend backwards and twist themselves into pretzels in order to fit the mold of what they think they should be as a leader, as a worker, as a participant in that global economy? It is, I believe it's quite a huge issue because, especially for women, there is so much essence, so much creativity in there. And if it's all locked and stifled and blocked by trying to pretend to be a man, then all of that is going to be channeled into some kind of issues with health.
That is 100% accurate. 100% accurate.
Yeah.
And that masculinity piece that you talked about is also something of significance that I saw in myself, that I've been working on bringing out more of my femininity because my early career was in a male-dominated field. So you either were going to get run over, pushed in a corner, or you needed to be able to stand your ground. Well, in order to stand your ground, you gotta kind of become a little more masculine. And like you said, bringing that home and then not allowing your partner, because I was married at the time, to be the man that they want to be or need to be, it damages the relationship. And then if you don't understand archetypal relationships, you don't even know how to navigate it. And that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, we could have a whole another episode on the just archetypal relationships, but there's a
Yes.
really big issue in the world right now, which is, I believe, both sides are having wounds. There's wounded feminine and there's wounded masculine. When the
Yes.
masculine is wounded, it becomes either defensive or excessively controlling, which then breaks down the trust and creates resistance in the feminine, which is
Mhm.
also wounded. So there has to be a beginning of a balance and healing from both sides. And I
Yeah.
think it actually starts with women healing themselves first in order to lead that movement of reconciliation, the movement of integration, because the women carry within themselves nurturing capacity, which can actually heal. But that is the interesting point, because it has to be very carefully balanced without trying to save or rescue people. So how do you provide this healing without rescuing or saving people? And the way to do it is within, inner world first. So if
Yes.
women actually start healing themselves, working through their issues and unblocking the things that are blocked within them, that can directly affect the outer world.
I totally agree with you on that. And we need more of that. More
And
of that.
that is why the programs of personal development transformations work on that, in that regard, because they
Yes.
encourage people to look within themselves first, start resolving all the issues that are happening in them, integrate, and then go
Mhm.
out into the world and invite others to follow the same path. But you can't force people on that path, and you can't do
Mhm.
it for them, because that is enabling. You can't save people, you can't rescue, and you can't enable. The only thing you can do is heal yourself and then show up
And then
what is possible.
be the example. I've had a few experiences. One was with a friend who I've known since college, which was a very long time ago. And we were having a conversation. I actually was visiting her, and she was in a moment of very much to me from an experience that she had had. And I was trying to redirect her to come out of that, at least get to by me and out of the victim mode. And she said to me by the end of the weekend, she said, I noticed something very different about you. She said, you were not like this 4 years ago. And so for me, that is just a wonderful testament of the fact that people can see it. The other experience that I've had repeatedly is when I interact with customer service people and my level of patience that I have, because I know they get berated all the time and difficult people. And it takes a lot for me to get there anyway. But with this training, I rarely. And so I had a gentleman just the other day. He was like, thank you so much for your patience. I'm so sorry that we didn't get this right, but you really made this easier for me.
That is spot on. And that is really the definitive trait of somebody who has done their work and has integrated or healed as much as they could. They show up in a different way. They show up as an elder. And like one of our teachers that we listen to, Rory, he talks about elders, they don't get triggered. When you are able to face the circumstances in your outer world and stay connected and centered and not be triggered into reactivity, that is the determining factor that separates great leaders from average leaders.
That is very correct. And that's who people want to work for. They want to work for the great leaders who are not triggered.
Yeah, so
I
tell me more about your vision of what you see the ideal leaders to be like.
I actually had benefit of having a couple of good ideal leaders. One of the traits from them was their willingness to make sure that you were developed, the focus, I would say humility, raising the significance of others. So they saw the talent in you. They knew the things that would help you grow. And so they start putting you in those positions to do so, versus a leader who is only focused on self and growing self and not giving you the opportunities to grow or even encouraging the conversations. So one thing that I could see different in the corporate space, and I worked for an organization who did this on the corporate level. And as you know, we talk about goals reinvented and setting the goal based on who you need to become, not necessarily to achieve it. Well, I worked for a company that did that. We called it the Big Hairy Audacious Goal. And when I learned this, I said, well, no, that's interesting that they had those goals, but they never pushed that down to the associate level because they promoted development. Develop your people, have 80% of your conversation at mid-year should be about development, not about, goal achievement. Well, what good way to help with that development is to assist them in setting their own personal, I call it BAG instead of BHAG, bold, audacious goal. What a great way, because now if I'm thinking, well, I see myself in this role, I'm not qualified for it today, but now we have a way to set a plan to help me get there. And to me, the mark of a great leader, the greatest leaders, are those who develop their people. And when you can master that and move people along, I had someone say to me recently, as I was talking to them about this vision, and they said, well, the difficulty I think that you may encounter is inside of organizations, they have rainmakers. And because they're rainmakers, their attitude, their emotional intelligence doesn't matter. The fact that they're making it rain and contributing to the bottom line is what's going to keep them in the role. And I said, well, that's very interesting that you said that, because what if there was a shift in how they looked at that? And what if they had a rainmaker that was emotionally intelligent that could develop more rainmakers? What would be of more value? Multiple rainmakers who are emotionally intelligent, or one rainmaker who wreaks havoc within the organization? I said it's just a shift. It's how you look at it. So I think that could be a great value to the organization, is understanding what the value is of having these kind of leaders and how that can actually improve the bottom line. If you've got a team that's high performing because they know how to clearly set their goals, people on the team have their values, they're properly guided. Why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, because what we have observed lately in the world is that the game is changing rapidly. The technological advancement has been extreme. we are dealing with new and new issues that we have not even foreseen before. And
Mhm.
I believe what is happening in the corporate world is that the rainmakers who used to operate on one level and produce great results are going to become either obsolete or not as effective, because if they're using old strategies, they no longer work on with the people who are on a different level of thinking. Also, if they are too rigid in their mindset and they're not understanding of like emotional quotient, the capacity to understand and empathize with others, that is going to limit their ability to connect. So there
Yeah.
is a need to develop more people who are aware of what emotional nature is within people, how to deal with it, how to communicate better, which
Mhm.
requires for a different approach on organizational level, from the leadership perspective, on all kinds of ways, in order to continue shifting with the world. The clearest example is working from home. Everybody shifted to online, and now they're trying to get people back into the office, and they're not having much luck with that.
No, no, people don't want to do it. I can personally tell you, I lived in a time where that decade of my career I was through me. I had great leaders. Part of my joy in that decade was in a time when DE&I was not a thing. I was valued, I was heard, and I was seen. But more importantly, I was a remote worker. Remote workers weren't a thing then either. And so then when I had to go back into an office, it was just like, but I get so much more done, not having to sit in traffic, not having to, because Zoom wasn't a thing either, not having to get dressed up and makeup, and I can produce. I can just sit here and produce because I'm focused, I'm driven, I'm all about, going higher, being competitive. So you don't have to worry about me sitting at home. And that one organization recognized that. They brought to me an opportunity and I turned it down. I chose not to grow. Anyway, now I recognize it, but they brought to me an opportunity. And their words were, we know that you can work from anywhere and that you prefer to remain where you are, and that is okay with us. But we would like for you to take on this particular role. Now, I said no because I knew it was going to mean significant travel. I knew that that role couldn't just sit where I was because there were executive team meetings. There was a staff of 50 people that were used to having a body on site. And so I said no. But as I reflect back, it was a growth opportunity that I should have just said yes to and grown through it to reach other goals that I wanted to achieve. I also want to bring up too, in having this type of leader leaders creates a certain kind of culture. And all of a sudden you have a culture where there's joy, where people want to show up and work, not only for the person, but because of the culture. And one of probably little known facts is 85% of people who show up to work show up for the paycheck. And only 15% show up because they really want to be there. They enjoy the work, they enjoy the space. But yet, 50% of our waking hours, assuming we're getting a full 8 hours of sleep, are spent on a job where we're just there for a paycheck.
It has become very clear when the lockdown occurred 3 years ago, that
Mhm.
people were not satisfied in their jobs and they're doing it just for the paycheck, but also they were looking for paycheck to pay portion of it for the commute in order to get to the job that they didn't like. So
Yes,
removing that, and that clarified a
that's
lot of things for a lot of people, how much
yes,
money and energy and stress they can save if they don't have to commute, and if they are no longer working at a job that they don't like. So
right.
that created a shift I believe, in the economy everywhere, and people started going and trying to do what they are enjoying more and more and trying to make it work, which is essential, I believe, for all of us as humanity to do what it is that we enjoy, because we bring more value to the world when we are inspired, when we are lit up on fire, and we're having fun.
Yes. And that's the place where I am now, is this lights me up. This inspires me. I knew that as I continued my journey, when found I was going to be laid off, I was going to be intentional if I stayed in that space to shift into roles that were more focused on raising the significance of others. So it was either going to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, or it was going to be, because I worked in the healthcare space, it was going to be health equity. So it was going to be raising it for the patient who was not being heard, valued, or seen, which we know is a thing and exists, or it was going to be in the space of the associate. And then I found this work. And so that opens it to an even wider audience, because it's not just locked into a particular organization or a particular group of people.
Yeah, that is interesting that you came from healthcare. And the reason I'm saying that is because the work of training, personal development, or coaching closely relates to healing work. It might not be healing specifically, but it is along the same lines. It is a service-based, heart-based type of business, heart-based work line, in order to uplift others and motivate them and inspire them and just hold their journeys. The person needs to have some kind of interest in healing modality of some sort. So talk to me about the difference that you see between how you were in healthcare, which is about health, about the patient, about the people, and the shift to a healing modality of sorts.
I'll clarify, my role in healthcare has always been either operations or financial focus. So not necessarily taking care of people, but taking care of a bottom line. That was my healthcare was, these are the initiatives, this is how we're going to grow. And so I'm here to guide the team on making those goals and achieving those goals. Well, you translate that into this work, and you're looking at an individual and their inner world and healing that inner world towards the goals and the values that they have for their life, because they have dreams. They may have let go of those dreams because of being sleeping awake and looped into patterns that they've just let go of them. I know I can speak for myself. That happened to me. I didn't start dreaming again until I came into this space. And it was like, wow, I didn't realize just how big of an impact it had, that my creativity was there, but kind of in a corner. And so to be able to have an impact greater on the world, as Peter likes to say, we're raising global consciousness. And most people don't really know about that or understand it. But what I can say is, when I really think about what raising global consciousness means and being a healer to get us there, is how many less school shootings might we have? How much less road rage might we have? How much less just overall impatient, angry people might we encounter if the world could just raise up a little bit and a little bit and a little bit at a time? What a magnificent place this would be to live in.
I love what you're talking about and the way that I see it, because what you explained about being taking care of the bottom line and being part of the organizational structure of healthcare, to me, it sounds very much masculine profession, very analytical, very left brain, very logical, which is masculine. And there's nothing wrong with it, because somebody has to do it. And there are people who are actually innately designed for that type of work. I used to do that kind of work a lot, very analytical, very left brain. Once I took a test which showed me how much left and right brain I had, and I had excessive amount of analytical thinking, and I was so happy about it. I thought, oh my goodness, look at me. I am so logical. I'm just gonna outwin all the competition. I'm going to get all my goals and achieve, achieve, achieve.
Yep.
And through my journey, I have been, as I've been integrating my feminine aspect, I have realized that I've actually twisted myself into this masculine profession and moving into this more healing modality of coaching and training for me has been the shift of moving to reconnect back to my creativity and my feminine side. And I think that a lot of women out there in the world have been presented with that choice. I understand and heal your feminine so that you don't have to pretend to do the masculine role anymore and actually can step into this role of healing the world on some level the way that you can with your unique skills and talents.
Yes, yes, yes. That is a great analogy and insight on the feminine side because there just isn't enough conversation amongst us as women, particularly in those environments, about the feminine side, about the strong left brain. You see it in some women, but again, I can't say that I came across any fully balanced woman, like particularly the ones who were succeeding. They may be succeeding at work and they may have been succeeding at least with their weight, but they didn't have relationships. So again, going back to that imbalance and adding now the imbalance of the left brain and the imbalance of the masculinity, because that definitely will break a relationship if a woman does not know how to exist in her feminine energy.
Yeah,
It's
it
been
is.
quite the transition for me, that's for sure.
Oh, yes, it is a huge transition. It is not something that we're brought up with. It is not something that we're taught. We have to figure it out ourselves and piece it together with in the best way that we can, while still trying to maintain the previous way in which we design our lives to be. And one of the things that I actually had a podcast episode with a woman, her name is Nicolette, and we talked about how there is a lack of communication and sharing among women of all the different issues that we go through, the menopause, the changes in hormones, the anxiety, the overthinking. It does not get discussed often enough, in depth enough among women. So we isolating ourselves from each other and then trying to take on these controlling roles in order to stay competitive. And that
Yes,
has been something that has been hurting a lot of women, I believe.
yes. Well, and I'll add to that. I think another thing that hurts us as women and people in general is we may have connections. I say my superpower is the ability to have long-term friendships. I have friend groups from as early as nursery school that, that group, there's some of us that started in nursery school, for sure, all of us in high school, that we still continue to connect at least once a month. But I also have friend groups from college, friend groups from different jobs that I've had, and we don't really do a good job of getting to know one another. We stay on the surface, and that's why these things that you're mentioning don't get discussed because we stay on the surface. We don't really ask the questions. One of my friend groups, I bought a game called Are We Really Strangers? That gets at asking those questions and really connecting. And one of the individuals in the group was kind of astonished that there were things that we didn't know about each other, but yet we had this long history. But yet there were other friends that we had that we met later or post our connection that knew these things about us. So I'm going to add that to part of the why behind why we don't have these conversations.
Yes, there's a lot of stigma that exists about a lot of things. There have been stigma about the migraines. There has been stigma about miscarriages in the previous episode that I discussed with Nicolette, in that women don't talk about that, but actually that is very common occurrence with women. So
Mm-hmm,
both miscarriages and migraines, and then the
mm-hmm,
whole range of other issues, because biologically we are designed to for threat detection. We as women have the capacity to see the threats much more prominent, much more faster, and much more often because of
mm-hmm,
how we're built. But that also causes anxiety on a higher level. But we don't talk about that. And instead, we stay in our brains, in our minds, worrying and overthinking things, which then adds to stress, which then continues on that cycle of poor health choices and things that affect our health and life, and then relationships. It all comes back
It,
to the circle of networking. We are all connected. Women
yeah,
hold the networking connection so much more readily and more in better capacity, because that is what they are biologically designed for: connection and communication. And
yes.
when we are not quite fully integrated within ourselves, we can't hold those connections as well.
That is correct. And it's interesting that you bring up the connection piece, as we have talked about the masculine side of me and less of the feminine. But not sure if you're familiar with a test that's out there called Strength Finders, where organizations were attempting to let's focus on your strengths and not your weaknesses. And connectedness was one of my top five strengths. And I see it in my life. Often I'll be having a conversation with someone. I'll think of someone like you two should get together. Perfect example. They're two ladies, both are EMF, as a matter of fact. I knew one from another group, and then she became EMF. And I put the two of them together. I'm like, you guys have several things in common. I think you should meet. And part of the commonality is you live in the same part of the country. And just yesterday, I saw a post where the two of them were out doing a hike, and it just made my heart smile because I'd introduced that connection that may not, it may have happened on its own, but I helped to accelerate it. I'll hold that. And then my other top strength, one of my other top strengths is strategy. And so this work also plays into that strength of being able to guide people on strategies that will work and help them grow and become the people they want to be and to lead the lives that they want to lead and not just react to everything.
Yes, and also in the context of the transformational process, sometimes people discover the difference in their strengths and values of what they used to have and what they built themselves up to be, wanting external validation and approval from the world, and bending themselves into being that which they thought world would value, and then discovering their actual strengths and their actual values that are innate to them, that they might have repressed in order to fit in somewhere. So that the personal transformation process and this elite mentorship forum that we both were part of really has helped me, at least, to identify which strengths I have been leaning on, that I designed and developed because I thought they would get me
Mhm.
something, and what are my actual strengths. So that has been a very
Exactly.
interesting process.
That has been that, and the four levels of consciousness and learning mastery that helps me stick with things more because I now know that point where I might walk away to stay in it. For me, I love living in a through me life. I just shared a story yesterday where last week, because in a through me life, things just happen effortlessly. So for the listeners who may not be aware of that, you still put in the same work effort as if you were in by me. So the four levels are to me, by me, through me, and as me. And by me, you're trying to make everything happen. You're the creator, you're the owner. And then through me, you let go of how it's going to happen and you lose your attachment to the outcome. And things just will happen effortlessly, like it did in that one decade. In one job in particular, things just happen. I couldn't have controlled any of those outcomes. I did what I could. Well, last week I had the experience, and this is an ongoing experience. I just am still amazed, but not surprised anymore, where I will have schedule conflicts. And I kid you not, they will deconflict on themselves. I'll look at the calendar, I'll see it and be like, okay, so I've got two things at the same time. I do nothing. And lo and behold, one of the parties calls me or reaches out to me and reschedules. How does that happen? How does that happen? Well, when you live in a through me life and you are connected to the universe, you listen to your intuition, which, by the way, is your GPS. That left brain used to fight that. It wanted to have evidence. So, yeah, the intuition was telling me the X, but the left brain was saying, oh, no, but I need evidence. Until I get that evidence, then I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. I've dropped that and I lean into it. If the intuition says X, then I go with X. On occasion, I don't, and I usually pay a price for it. So,
Yes, I have experienced that as well. And in my perception, by me mode is the masculine approach, driven, hardworking, success, goals,
chasing.
achievement, competition. Through me is
Mhm.
the feminine approach where you flow with the river and expertly navigate that river. So I'm curious to see if you can pinpoint why were you more in the feminine energy back then in that decade when things were moving smoothly for you, and why did you shift back to masculine way?
I wish I could tell you exactly because it just kind of happened. I just showed up. Like I said, this particular job, I was valued, I was heard, I was seen. I definitely was still very career focused, so I wasn't imbalanced or in balance. I was not in balance. I had weight issues, I had relationship issues, but it just was the space that the universe brought me to. And I never could understand. I would always tell people that was my favorite job, but I never knew why until I did this work. And I also did do just before this work, I also did some diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And it was through these two things that I realized, hey, that was why those jobs were good for you because you were valued, you were heard, you were seen. I mean, I came into the job role, I came into it from a consulting role where I had done the same work. So I expressed a concern very early on, like probably in the first 30 days, that, from the consulting side, we're not always getting the information we need to do the work. And I wanted to caution them that it could take more time than they were projecting. And they responded back to me. They were like, oh, no, that's not going to happen here because we're in control. So if you come across instances where people are delaying, you let us know and we'll come in and clear that road for you and make it happen. And they did. And they made sure that people knew if she's coming to you, she's asking for information, then whatever you're working on at that moment takes a back seat and you need to get her the information. Never experienced that before. The job role was about getting approvals that were based on a government agency. And my very first set of approvals, again, through me, I had no control over this, came in on a Thursday. On Friday, I was on a plane traveling to corporate headquarters. And on Saturday, I was in a box at a football stadium with the CEO of the company. What do you think my conversation with him was? That's a through me life. And I didn't even know it. I had a trip one time where I had a pet pedicurist And I looked down, I was like, oh, it's about time for a pedicure. I guess when I get back, I need to call Cindy. By the time I got to my next place where I had to change planes, Cindy was calling me. Hey, I think it's about time for you to come in for a pedicure. What? Those kind of things happen to me now, but I'm aware of it and I understand why. It was just the universe. That was where the universe wanted me.
That is fascinating. And I believe things like that happen for us to give us a glimpse of what is possible when we are truly aligned.
Yes,
It's almost like a freebie. Here, have a glimpse of what is possible when you're in the right location, right environment, among the right people, and everything matches with your skills and your talents and your innate capabilities. When everything it comes together, what is possible? And
it
then
is
something
possible.
can come out of alignment. And if you're not consciously aware of all the different parts that are required for you to be aligned, then you might be wondering what happened. How come that didn't last? But that's a glimpse and a beginning to see what is possible when you're consciously aligned.
Yes. And I like that you brought that up. And so this is also feeds into kind of the vision of people being aware and can stay in alignment because two things based on what you were just saying. One, for me, I came out of alignment when I decided not to take that growth opportunity. And by the way, that was the second time a growth opportunity was offered to me. And when I stepped out of corporate America, I was still seeking to reach that level. But yet that level walked up to me, landed in my lap, and said, here you are, no interviews, no nothing. And 20 years later, still trying to achieve that because I decided not to accept it. And then the other part of it is I did get laid off from that job. It was kind of an industry-wide thing because there was a shift. So costs had to shrink as a result of the industry. But I remembered, we talk about money mindset and the limiting beliefs that we grow up with. And my mother was always that one, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, or yeah, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. She would always encourage me as I was looking for my next job role to just take whatever. And I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. When you have had your ideal best job experience, you don't want to go back. You just don't want to go back. You want to keep living that. And so that's what I'm searching for. Sadly, I don't know that I ever found it again because, as I mentioned in the beginning, only 25% of my career was in that space, and it was that time period. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I understand that. And I had experience like that too, where I had ideal job, and ever since I've been trying to find it again, couldn't. And so I decided I have been on the journey now to create that kind of ideal job for myself. And that is, of course, much more difficult than just joining an existing organization, but
Yes.
it's still worthwhile pursuing because it is something that comes from intrinsic motivation. It is the motivation that
Mm.
comes from within, despite what the outer world is saying. So that is how I find myself and how I think I've talked to a lot of people who find themselves on this journey of alignment and doing the things that are right for them and not the things that they think the world expects of them. And
Yeah.
so in closing, let's talk a little more about who these people, these leaders are. So we determined that they are women for you. Are they in specific profession? Are they in specific industry? Is it still health industry that you're working with, or are you looking at other industries as well?
It could be right now, any industry, as long as it's a woman and she's in the leadership space. It could be not for profit because I am part of a sorority, which is a not for profit. I see a lot of the same imbalances, particularly for those who rise in the organization because you become a member and then you're a part of a chapter. And you graduate college if you join as a collegiate because you don't have to be limited to college. And you join what we call an alumni chapter. So my sorority is called Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I have to give them a shout out. But you're in your local city, and so you have an alumni chapter. So you have leaders. You have leaders at the collegiate level. Well, then if you want to grow, you may decide to take on a regional role. And then if you want to grow, you may decide to take on a national role or be on a national committee. And I see some of the things that we encounter. I look at it and I go, oh, wow, the organization could really benefit from learning this. But I also know that there are financial limitations. So I'm like, well, I think the only way to kind of accomplish that is we'd have to find a sponsor who'd be willing to bear the cost for us to take our leaders through this. But I think it would value the organization and other organizations like it, because we call ourselves the Divine Nine, to have this kind. So it's just leaders, and women in particular is where my passion is, because I think we just bear more than the men do, unless we're just lucky and have a good support team or village around us. And I still think even with that, there's somewhere that is going to be out of balance, because you could have a great village and that takes care of, say, your home, takes care of your kids. But then what's your relationship with your kids if you're always out there working and maybe they're wanting you home, or they're wanting you to show up at their event?
Yes, absolutely. The way that women have to deal with so many things is, of course, an enormous amount of stuff to deal with. So it is clear that there is more support that's needed for women in leadership roles, but even for women who are just occupying lower level positions that are not overseeing teams in the organization. The challenges are across the board very similar. So that's very interesting. So where could people find more about you?
Well, they can find me on Facebook as Sabrina Shirley. They can find me on Instagram at I am Sabrina Shirley. They can find me on LinkedIn as Sabrina Shirley. And they can find me at sabrinashirley.com. And I am in the process of creating a free gift for people. So they will be able to go to freegiftfromsabrina.com. It's this close to being ready. So slightly ahead of schedule to offer it, but I'll go ahead and put it out there. And then if people want to check back and receive it, and it is around authenticity and the mistakes that people make and the insecurities that get in our way. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I will add the description with the links below, and people can look there. But if anybody who was listening to this podcast is a woman in a leadership role in a highly stressed and dynamic environment, you would want to follow Sabrina and see where she is taking this new chapter in her life, because there's definitely need for more support for women leaders so that they can be better, so that they can lead their teams better. So definitely check out her work, and know that you can be so much better with just some help and some guidance.
thank you for that. And thank you for this interview. This has been very, very lovely.
Yes, I enjoyed this conversation, and thank you everybody who has made it this far. Thank you for watching and for listening. We appreciate your attention, and if you have any comments, please leave them below. I'd love to know what resonated, what you'd like to hear more of, and I'm going to continue making more of these episodes that inspire and guide you on your path of discovering your own inner hero. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.